Good evening, Mr. Bond fans, and welcome once again. To put it mildly, I think if you're anything like myself, you will be incredibly excited that the Bond 25 wheels of production are beginning to turn, and very recently there was a casting call put out for some, what I can only assume are crucial leading roles in the next Bond adventure. I guess this is somewhat similar to the casting call that revealed Hinks as being a character in the previous film Spectre. This time there were no actual character names involved, but it did confirm a few important things. Of course, that the film is going to be directed by Danny Boyle, that its shooting will begin in December 2018, and that it will run for 5 to 6 months. So, on the basis of that, I'm really hoping that we're going to get some kind of press conference or some kind of official announcement in sort of like October, November time. But more excitingly, the casting call was put out for 3 parts. Okay, so I'll run through them now. You've probably already read this, but just for memory's sake. So there is a male leading role, playing age 30s to 60s, Russian, also open to suggestions of actors from the Balkans or similar, must speak fluent English, characteristics, charismatic, powerful, innovative, cosmopolitan, bright, cold, and vindictive. Now, those characteristics are kind of very broad, and I don't think it necessarily tells you much about the character, because a lot of those words can, match to a good deal of Bond villains. The most interesting part of that, I think, is that they say Russian. And also that the playing age of 30s to 60s is quite broad, so I'm guessing that they're still perhaps not quite... they've not quite pinned down that character exactly yet, because, I mean, whether or not he's in his 30s, which would be much younger than Bond, or in his 60s, which is not that much older than Bond anymore, but it would appear to be much older to Bond on screen. I think that's quite interesting, that they're so open in that age bracket. But Russian is very interesting, because obviously Bond films, often for plots, they'll look at what is affecting the world at that time, and what can they draw from, and obviously Russia have been in the news a lot recently, certainly here in the UK, and I'm guessing over in America as well, in terms of, interfering with elections, and possibly poisoning citizens of other nations. I find it very interesting that they're going down that angle. It's a more classic approach to the villain, I guess, because whenever people think of Bond, they obviously think of, fighting Cold War spies and Russians and all that kind of stuff, so that's all good. Moving on, we have a female leading role as well, playing age 30 to 45, Russian, but also open to suggestions of actresses from Balkans or similar, must speak fluent English, which is, I guess that's a good specification when it comes to, Bond girls, considering how many of them had their voices dubbed in the first few films in the series. Okay, description. Very striking. Strong physical / fighting / stage combat skills required. Characteristics: intelligent, brave, fierce and charming. She's witty and skillful. A survivor. Again, I think interesting that this character is called out as being Russian. I can assume that being a female leading role, that's going to be a Bond girl, but there were all these rumours recently that the main villain in this film is going to be a female. So I'm kind of surprised to see that that is the only female leading role called out in this casting call, unless perhaps it's a partnership of villains, if both these Russian guys are villains. But it's just by characteristics, by saying brave... she's witty and skillful, a survivor. Those words connotate goodness to me anyway. I don't think you'd describe a villain necessarily as brave. I don't think you'd describe Xenia Onatopp as being brave. So I can only assume that that's going to be the Bond girl of the film. Russian as well as the male leading role, who is presumably going to be the main villain. So I'm kind of thinking maybe there'll be some kind of connection there. I'm not quite sure. And then we have the final element of this casting call, the male supporting role. Playing age 35 to 55, again, quite broad. Interesting again, Maori is one of the specifications. Advanced physical fighting, stage combat skills required. Characteristics, authoritative, cunning, ruthless, and loyal. So... That's really interesting, because I'm assuming that this is going to be the henchman, but Maori is quite an interesting thing to call out. I'm assuming by that, given my, stereotypes of Maoris, and I'm sorry if this is in any way wrong, but I understand that a lot of those gentlemen are quite, big, muscly guys. So I'm guessing we're going to have another very physical, brutish henchman, somewhat similar to Hinks in Spectre. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about that. It feels a little bit repetitive to have that 2 films in a row, but hey, I mean, there are so many henchmen like that in the Bond series that, well, one more and, give him a couple of, special traits or whatever, he might well be a worthy addition to the henchman canon. Now, I'm really not one for speculating on casting all that much, because more often than not, the Bond films... Well, I mean, I think it'll be interesting for this film whether or not they go down the more obscure foreign actor route, like they did with Mads Mikkelsen and Matthew Amalric, or whether they're going to go for big names like Javier Bardem, Christoph Waltz, which they have done for the previous 2 films. So that's one of the reasons why I don't terribly like speculating too much on casting for Bond films, because I really like it when they will find actors who, maybe just at the start of their careers have not had that international breakthrough role yet. I would say Eva Green is a perfect example of that as well for Vesper Lynd. I like it when they find those people, really great, talented, strong performers, and put them in these films, and that serves as their breakout. So, I don't necessarily think that, suggesting Steven Seagal for the main Russian part is terribly interesting. What I do find interesting is what these say about the film and the narrative that it's gonna take. Obviously, it's gonna have some kind of Russian connection. Will Bond be in Russia? I think that'd be very interesting. Is he gonna go to New Zealand? To see this Maori guy? I mean, I have no idea. All we can assume from that casting call is that is gonna be our main villain, main girl, and main henchman. Or at least that's what it seems like on paper, which makes me hope that it isn't necessarily the case. And I know that Bond films are not necessarily mysteries as such. More often than not, we know going into the film who is going to play the villain. It shouldn't be a massive surprise. However, this just sounds very stereotypically Bond, if you know what I mean. It's, big, older Russian bad guy, Russian Bond girl, and then, big henchman. But, I'm sure that, like, Danny Boyle and the screenwriter and the producers and everyone have, they're not just going to give us a stereotypical Bond adventure. I'm sure that there must be something special about this in order for Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson to throw out Neil Purvis and Robert Wade's script and take on this new script. There must be something special about it. I'm just looking at this casting stuff and I'm like, I don't want to be disappointed like I was with Christoph Waltz and Oberhauser in Spectre when it was like, they announced Christoph Waltz is playing Oberhauser, and it's like, well, okay, so that obviously he can't be Blofeld because that would be too obvious. So obviously it must be Monica Bellucci or David Bautista or Ralph Fiennes or Andrew Scott or literally anyone else. And they, of course, made Christoph Waltz Blofeld, which I found very disappointing. You can see my Spectre review for that. So I guess maybe I'm hoping for a little bit more of a surprising twist to this. Not that Bond films are necessarily known for their twists, but I could just do with something a little more unexpected or, I want something to subvert my expectations. And I'm hopeful. I'm really, really hopeful. And in other Bond news, the good people at MI6 Confidential were kind enough to send me issue 2 of their special publication line, this one being Remembering Roger Moore. And I was very lucky that it arrived just in time for a long train journey I had to make, and it made for absolutely wonderful reading all throughout the journey. So basically this is the second of these special publications. The first one was Peter Lamont focused, which I made a video about it a while ago. You can go see it there. This one is basically a huge tribute to Roger Moore, of course. It's, 99 pages, and most of those pages are filled with testimonials from some of Roger Moore's previous James Bond co-stars. So there's, Jane Seymour, Maud Adams, Madeline Smith, Lois Chiles, and quite the amount of contributions and tributes they were able to achieve is kind of mind-boggling in some ways. I mean, Julian Glover's in here. I mean, basically, if they were a prominent co-star in one of Roger Moore's Bond films and they're still alive, they're probably in here. To the extent that Christopher Walken and Grace Jones are actually in this, which is amazing. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I did turn straight to the Grace Jones page first to see what she had to say about working with Roger Moore based on all of the controversial stories, shall we say, about how the two of them had some friction while on set together. What was it Roger Moore once said? I'm pretty sure Roger Moore said something to the extent of, if you don't have something nice to say about someone, about Grace Jones, which is quite hilarious. Anyway, the whole publication is of a really high quality, just like the Peter Lamont version from a few months ago. Highly recommended if you can get yourself a copy. I think it makes for a really interesting, good reading and tribute, and to hear some of the anecdotes that a lot of Roger's co-stars have of him. It's a really great read. And there's only one more bit of Bond news that I wish to cover on this particular video, and that is that LEGO have released a special Aston Martin DB5 007 set. They unveiled it in London very recently. Naomi Harris was there for the unveiling. It was a shame that I couldn't actually go and be there myself. But I'm just kind of curious. I don't actually own the set myself. It's kind of pricey. So what I'm just putting out there is that I'm curious if any of you guys have bought the set yet, and basically how it is. You know, are the gadgets like fully functioning? Does it move well? Is it a nice display piece? Because I'm not gonna lie, I was a massive LEGO fan when I was a kid, and one of my absolute dreams would have been to have a LEGO James Bond set. So it's somewhat dream come true. I mean, not quite dream come true, because the actual dream was having a giant LEGO volcano lair set from You Only Live Twice, which would have been pretty amazing. But I know that there are some kind of rules like Eon and LEGO about marketing what is essentially a grown-up, you know, film series to kids, and having, you know, little guns and sexy ladies in LEGO form. So I guess the compromise for that was building this Aston Martin DB5 model, which looks really cool and very exciting, but again, the price tag. So I'm just kind of wanting to know your guys' reviews of that, I suppose, and whether or not it's a worthy investment. So on that note, Bond fans, that's it for now, but stay tuned, because the Diamonds Are Forever review is coming very soon, along with a re-ranking of all the James Bond films. I've been re-watching all the films in the series again, and ranking, and some very different opinions and rankings have come out of this particular viewing. I think some of you might be very surprised. I think License to Kill fans might be incredibly surprised with where I've re-ranked that one. But so those are all coming in the next couple of months, and as well as reviews for the books. I'm reading the books. I'm halfway through Diamonds Are Forever, so finally gonna get to those Ian Fleming classics. That's it for this time, Bond fans, so long for now.